Coming up.
All of Canada's international assistance in the country averaged around $60 million. On the bilateral development side, in terms of the program that targets directly Sudan, we spend about $9.5 a year.
And the humanitarian assistance that has been allocated for Sudan in the future, can you tell us which entities that will be flowing through?
What are we doing to help those women have access to abortion or to sexual and reproductive health products, etc., to help them in terms of that? I would like to know what we're doing about that.
Does the Canadian government believe that crimes and crimes against the humanity have been committed in Sudan?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
The first member up is MP Chong. You have 5 minutes.
Can you tell us, do we have any consular or diplomatic officials on the ground in Sudan?
No, we do not.
Okay. And do we have any locally engaged staff who are still engaged in Sudan, or they all have been on suspension as well?
As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, as the member mentioned, we did suspend operations of the mission in Khartoum. We do not employ anyone through that mission now. There are 2 staff working out of the embassy in Addis, Canadians, and we are in process of hiring a locally engaged staff there who will also work on Sudan.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Another question I have is, so in the G7, the United States, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan, of those missions, are any presently in operation in Sudan of our fellow G7 countries, or are they also all suspended as well?
No, from our like-minded groups, there are no open missions in Sudan.
Okay. And are those missions for our closest partners and allies, are they also operating out of Ethiopia?
There are a fair number. There is a critical mass of missions and ambassadors to Sudan who are based in Addis, which is one of the reasons we decided to do the same, but not all. I don't have a list here. Okay.
To get a sense of things. Can you tell us, do you have any sense when our mission in Sudan will recommence?
No,
okay.
It's difficult to say at this point. I would say not in the short to medium term.
Okay. The other question I have is, more broadly, what other assets on the ground does Canada have, not just in Sudan, but in the broader region, military assets, other assets that could be brought to bear to help, along with our partners and allies, to resolve this crisis?
Mr. Chair, the question with regards to military assets is outside my remit. I won't be able to answer that, so would refer you to D&D. In terms of Canada's approach, we did announce, Minister Houston announced in April, approximately $130 million worth of Canadian assistance. This is around $100 million in humanitarian and $30 million worth of development financing.
Okay, and when is that money going to flow? Over the course of several years or immediately? What's the sort of time frame on the delivery of those?
So the $100 million in humanitarian is for this year. The $30 million in development assistance is over multiple years. We spent in 2022-23, all of Canada's international assistance in the country averaged around $60 million. On the bilateral development side, in terms of the program that targets directly Sudan, we spend about $9.5 a year.
And the humanitarian assistance that has been allocated for Sudan in the future, can you tell us which entities that will be flowing through?
Sure. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Deloche.
Thank you. We work through experienced partners, so some have been identified. They're members. We have a mix of NGO partners, UN organizations such as WFP, the World Food Programme, the Office for Coordination, OCHA. We also have UNHCR, given the levels of displacement in Sudan, as well as Red Cross partners.
There was an article in this week's New York Times by Mr. Christoph about the severe famine that could be taking place in Sudan. And specifically, he mentioned the work that the World Food Programme is doing there. how much of the money, can you tell us how much of that money is going to be apportioned for the World Food Programme?
I would have to return with those specific numbers.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you. Mr. Chair, those are all my questions. Thanks.
The things that I want to know is it obvious that we are supporting 1325, the United Nations Declaration. It's obvious we're putting our money where our mouth is in some of these meetings. But and that is helping women. Now, giving women hygiene products is not really a way to deal with women who have been raped and sexually violated. And so what are we doing to help those women have access to abortion or to sexual and reproductive health products, et cetera, to help them in terms of that? I would like to know what we're doing about that. Secondly, it's great to listen to women coming in and talking about what is going on and giving you examples of what's happening. But what are we doing to move forward on the whole 1325, which is prevention of conflict, negotiation during conflict, and of course, post-conflict rebuilding. So what are we doing to encourage that and give women a real say at the table in those issues, not just to hear what they are telling you on the sidelines? Are we doing anything about that?
I'm going to start just a bit with the development program and then turn to my colleagues. Certainly, the ambassador will have a fair amount to share, and then also Ms. Delage will have some comments with regards to how we support these issues on the humanitarian side. The Government of Canada mobilized $6 million worth of emergency funding in 2023, and what the purpose of that was specifically to recognize that there were going to be new challenges that women and children, particularly girls, would be facing as a result of the onset of the crisis. So we decided to allocate this fund specifically to education in emergencies, as well as for the prevention and response to sexual and gender-based violence. So some of the concrete examples that I can share in terms of what that money does is that we've supported 134 service points. These are safe spaces for women and children, as well as mobile clinics in response to people that are experiencing sexual and gender-based violence. 100,000 people have received mental health supports as a result of that funding, and there have been 80,000 consultations for sexual and reproductive health. I think these are significant ways of recognizing the unique ways in which women experience conflict and mobilizing development funds to be able to respond to that. But at the same time, of course, women are also very much involved in needing to support their families in the context of this food security crisis. And so one of the things that we have done is adjust existing food security programming in agriculture to be able to be responsive in areas where it's actually possible still to work, and to create more resilience in communities by ensuring that they can continue to plant and to grow and have access to seeds. And as we know, a lot of smallholder farmers are women, and so these projects work directly with women to help them be better able to support their families. Ambassador?
I just would like you to elaborate on access to abortion after rape. Sorry, not you. I'm asking Ms. O'Neill.
I'm not able to speak to that
You're
topic.
not able to. So are you able to speak to that?
Abortion is illegal in Sudan, so we do not support those services in countries where it's illegal.
But it's not legal in places like Poland, where we have refugees coming from Ukraine, but we are working to ensure that women have access to that. So I don't know why we can't do that in Sudan.
I'm afraid I don't have an answer for that. I can't compare to other countries.
Okay.
I can speak if the chair permits, related to the topic of women directly at the table. And perhaps I sense in the member's tone what I sense from a number of Sudanese women as well, of enough of listening to us, enough of us being on the sidelines outside the door. That's very much the tone that every single Sudanese woman brings to any political discussion. And so to be clear, in Switzerland, they did meet with the parties that were, all of the parties that were gathered at within the group of internationals that was there. They did not meet with the RSF because the SAF did not come. They did not want to be perceived as favoring one side, or they didn't want to be perceived as meeting with one only. They did meet with what table there was. They were not permanent members, however, and they talked about that as something that was deeply frustrating. That's one of the reasons that Canada supported this effort by the U.S. to bring women physically to the location, to talk as much as possible, to have someone there with the fancy title of ambassador who somehow helps get closer to the table. But that's very much where we were going. And perhaps this is also in part an answer to the other member's question about, are we supporting, how do we get funds and assistance directly to smaller organizations. Canada has also been funding networks and organizations of women-led civil society organizations in Sudan to focus on prevention, essentially, to get women involved in all sorts of conflict resolution, prevention, mediation at local levels, on local disputes, training women, although none of them at this point need to be trained, but getting access and advocating, giving space and opportunity to advocate for themselves. So that is very much something that is, the focus is not just an interesting side story, it's getting to the
I'm
center.
glad to hear that, because I think 1325's very essence is about getting women there at the table, being part of the prevention
we're out
and
of time.
negotiation. I
Dr.
think
Fry,
that's important.
We're
Thanks.
out of time.
I speak to my community members, my constituents from the Sudanese community, and one of the issues is the critical humanitarian access inside the country, where the large, probably displaced number of people happened to take place as a result of this ugly war. And the negotiation in Switzerland, led by the U.S., get to emphasize on this issue. How successful was that negotiation, and did that improve the situation at all?
Thank you. The negotiations in Switzerland were successful in that there was a recognition of an agreement to open border access with regards to humanitarian access, but that was largely the only accomplishment. I think we're fairly disappointed in the absence of an actual ceasefire and the continued fighting, of course, by the belligerents. I might turn it over to the ambassador in case she has anything else to add, because she was there.
Thank you. So to add a little specificity to that, they got agreement to open 2 humanitarian supply routes. One is the Adjourned crossing, which is on the border with Darfur, between Chad and Darfur, and the other in the Daba Road, which is gives access to the north and west from Port Sudan. They got guarantees from both parties to secure safe and unhindered humanitarian access. I think it's fair to say that the parties still have a ways to go in delivering on that commitment. And we've seen both parties hinder the development or the delivery and access of aid.
Are you aware of any incidents where people that's supposed to exit to a safe place or to a place where they can really find to flee? Is there any incidents that was reported about people getting killed or other trafficking that took place while this is happening?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll maybe refer you to the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission. So this was started as a result of a resolution by the UN Human Rights Council. Canada was a co-sponsor. It's mandated to monitor and investigate human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law. They released a report in September. The findings and the evidence is significant with regards to the kinds of actions that you're describing. There have been reports of humanitarian workers being killed. The report itself found that both SAF and the RSF and allies are responsible for large-scale violations, many of which amount to war crimes. This includes things like airstrikes, destruction of civilian infrastructure, ethnic-based attacks, rape, SGBV. I mean, the list is really, it's quite horrendous in terms of the kinds of violations that they're seeing, including against children in terms of the recruitment of child soldiers. It goes a little bit farther as well with regards to the RSF and suggests that there's reasonable grounds to suggest that the RSF and its allies committed war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Thank you. I have a question about the Zamzam camp. How many people, have any of you visited, or have any of the Canadian members of delegation have visited the camp?
I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Delage on the Zamzam camp. I have not visited myself, and I can't comment on past visits by diplomats.
I have not visited.
And the number of people.
Yeah. I have not visited either on Zamzam camp. I do not have the current number. Yes, we have 500, their current estimates is 500,000 people in Zanzam camp.
Any Canadian organization you are aware of that working or helping that you know of and have reported anything from that camp?
I do not have, we can look into that, but not off the top of our...
Because I'm interested to know what role exactly Canadian organizations have taken into the camp. I visited camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, where about 105 different organizations were there, some Canadians, some, of course, from the rest of the world. So I'm interested to know if there's any idea how many Canadian organizations were on the ground or still on the ground in the camp.
I can speak to what we are doing and to support people in the camp. We are WFP, the World Food Program, is our largest humanitarian partner, and they are scaling up right now to respond to over 180,000 people who have not been receiving assistance or very limited, given the very challenging access situation in that camp.
Is it safe to assume that Canada's focus on this specific mission is probably food, as famine is a big issue on the camp?
Yes. Yes, food is one of the largest sectors that we support, but we also provide support sector activities under water and sanitation, hygiene services, nutrition, shelters. These are all the largest needs that we are seeing across the country.
Thank you.
Madam Delaney, in your opening round, you talked about and used the term meaningful peace. Can you expand on that?
I think I'll also be turning over to my colleague, the ambassador, and I think a meaningful peace is one that is a peace for everybody. It's a positive peace. It's a peace in which everyone has the opportunity to participate in the decisions that their government and their country is making, where services are provided to everyone, where no matter where they live and what their gender is or what their ethnicity is, they have the opportunity to participate in the governance of their country and to access services. That has not been the case in many, many decades or ever in Sudan. First, as a result of the approach that President Bashir took during his time, where he really concentrated the benefits of the resources in the center, in Khartoum, neglecting the periphery. And we saw the results there with regards to the civil war with South Sudan and then later with Darfur, and the ultimate decision on the part of South Sudanese through a referendum to separate from the country.
So if I understand correctly, you're talking about an internal process. Is there an external party that could be a peace broker, the AU or something along those, respected by all those parties?
The challenge in this context is that there are a number of different avenues through which it might be possible to broker a peace, and many different actors. So the African Union is involved. They have hosted events, including with civilians, in order to discuss what a peace might look like in the country. Then we have also regional actors like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia hosted talks in the initial months of the conflict in Jeddah to be able to try, with the U.S., to try and come to an agreement between the RSF and the SAF. We saw also the most recent Geneva talks hosted by Switzerland and led by the Americans, with participation from Saudi Arabia as well.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to my colleague, Ziad.
Thank you, colleague. I did ask a question about the exact role or the most significant role of the Canadian government or Canadian organization. If you don't, you're not going to give us an answer now, but if possible, we can get an answer in writing from you. That would be very helpful to the community. My next question is, there's over 18,800 people were killed since August 2023 in Sudan, based on reportings we have. And it seems like it's going in all different directions, not just between the people that the army's fighting, it's just beyond, and the civilians, children, women are victims, are the one that paying the most price. Does the Canadian government believe that crimes and crimes against the humanity have been committed in Sudan?
Yes, we do.
And so what are we doing? Is this against individuals or organizations or both? And how are we going, as Canada, how are we approaching this?
I'll also just highlight, going back a little bit, I wanted to sort of underscore the support that Canada is providing to the civilian platform Takadam. This is one of the broadest coalitions of civilian actors in Sudan. 40% of the participants at the founding conference that took place recently in Addis were women, and a similar number were youth. So in terms of a Canadian role in finding a way forward, we are working through this option of supporting civilian voices to be a counterpoint to the belligerents. And then in terms of the advocacy we're undertaking, Canada was one of the co-sponsors of the resolution of the fact-finding mission that has gathered the evidence and suggests that there have been war crimes and crimes against humanity.
When I throw the 18th, I'm done.
Mr. Evans.
Well, thank you.
You know, I'm going to go back to the report that we've seen from MSF, and just to read your quote, this is a question for you, Ambassador. This is a crisis unlike any other I have seen in my career. Multiple health emergencies happening simultaneously with almost no international response from the UN and others. Newborn babies, pregnant women, and new mothers are dying in shocking numbers. And so many of these deaths are due to preventable conditions, but almost everything has broken down. They further say that for this crisis to be addressed, the United Nations must act decisively and that they must accelerate the return of staff and that there must be more resources made available. What other things can we do to alleviate this crisis that is clearly targeting women, Ambassador?
Thank you for that. I read the same report. I think it said that the majority of deaths were caused by sepsis, which is exceptionally preventable, both in babies, newborns, and in their mothers. We need more money committed overall. This was a core appeal from everyone who was around the table in Switzerland and has been there, has been advocating for this for a long time. We talked about Canada fulfilling its commitments made at the Paris conference, effectively a pledging and donor conference. Many of those commitments have not been delivered upon, so we need to encourage, and many people talk about the importance of encouraging all of our partners to deliver on the commitments that they've made and to increase the commitments that they've made. And ultimately, this requires the full addressing of the issue requires peace. There's only a degree to which even increased UN presence in supplies is going to be functional when there's no functioning stability health care system and not regular aerial attacks on those delivering assistance. So continuing to pressure parties to the talks and pressure a humanitarian pause access, anything that will enable this service to get delivered itself.
And increased resources, of course.
Always.
That's my 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam McPherson. We now go to Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Often in these conflicts, what fuels the conflict is the ability to get U.S. dollars. And, Sudan's top exports are agriculture, was mentioned, but their top export is, one of their top exports is agriculture, oilseeds, but the top export is gold. And gold exports have not diminished at all throughout this conflict. And our understanding is that a lot of that ends up getting smuggled out of the country, and I'm sure that it's in return for U.S. dollars. And that, in turn, fuels the purchase of military kit and equipment. So what is the Government of Canada doing to ensure that none of that those illicit proceeds are being laundered through our financial system? And I ask that in the context of the recent $3 billion provision that TD Bank has set aside and the recent resignation of the TD Bank CEO in light of money laundering operations that have been conducted through the bank in the United States. There have been recent FinTrack fines leveled against big Canadian banks late last year and early this year for failing to comply with anti-money laundering legislation. There are other fines that have been levied against Canadian banks by the U.S. authorities. So what are we doing to ensure that no monies are being laundered through our financial system with respect to what's happening in Sudan?
Mr. Chair, I think that the comment about the challenge of the export of gold and the degree to which it funds the two belligerents in this side is a really pertinent one and a real significant challenge for the international community in Canada as part of that to tackle this. In terms of finding a way to cut off the financing to these belligerents and their ability to buy weapons. I unfortunately can't comment on how our financial institutions can prevent that. we can look into it and see if there's a way to come back in writing, but it is somewhat outside my remit.
I ask it because the minister imposed sanctions, I believe earlier this year, on individuals and entities in Sudan. The enforcement of those sanctions is now important. And so, the federal government's recently in the process of implementing a beneficial ownership registry for federally incorporated entities under the Canada Business Corporations Act. It's undertaking other measures to combat money laundering. So just curious as to what GAC's role in all of this as the lead on sanctions and sanctions enforcement is to prevent any illicit monies going through our system, which fuel conflicts like the one in Sudan.
Sorry, we're out of time. Very, very briefly, please.
I think the member makes a good point, which is we do have a role with regards to determining sanctions. And in terms of the 6 sanctions that were announced, several of them are organizations that are known for having either logistical operations, links to gold exports, financing networks for the RSF and the SAF.
Thank you.